Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 56 of Be With Me. We're in the chapter, one of the most famous chapters in the Bible, 1 chapter 13, and it's all talking about love. Now, I want to talk about the interior, the hard internal work of love. And I'm going to title this the Forbears. I'm going to spell that for F-O-U-R, the Forbears of love. I'm also going to spell it the Forbears, F-O-R-B-E-A-S. So the Forbears, the Forbears of love. Now, what forbear means is to restrain an impulse and to refrain from something. And we're going to talk about the restraints and the self-control, the bearing with, the hard internal work that is love. And we're going to talk about four different of the words that are used, that Paul uses to describe love. So here's the passage. You're familiar with it. You could quote it probably to me. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So I want to pick, of those, 15 or so, I want to pick four of them because what caught my eye is in the Greek definition of each of those words, it talked about bearing up or enduring in a certain circumstance. So the first one was patience. What that means is to bear up when provoked. So it answers the question of forbear when. We're going to ask the question forbear when, forbear who, forbear where, and forbear why. So forbear when. When you are provoked, when circumstances are particularly difficult. So patience means to be forbearing when you are provoked. That's the first one. The second one is in verse 7, it says to bear all things. And what that means is to forbear or pass over in silence people. That is, it is a choice to forbear the faults of other human beings around us. So it is basically not letting the sins and the faults of other humans sort of get to you. So it's bearing with people. It's a little bit of a misnomer where it says bears all things. It's actually bear. It's not things. Bear all people would be a better way to say that. Is we are in the midst of human beings. If your church isn't perfect, your spouse isn't perfect, your children aren't perfect. We are surrounded by imperfect people, and guess what? You're one of them. So let's everybody take a chill pill and suspend judgment and have a little bit of forbearance with the people around us. So the first one is forbear when, that is when you're provoked. The second one is forbear who, that is forbear with the people around you. Okay, the third one that I want to talk about is to endure. So endurance endures all things, which means to bear up under when you are underneath something. To keep standing when you are underneath. It's like Atlas holding up the world. It's to bear where do we find you in this particular endurance? We find you underneath something. We find you underneath circumstances. So you are like buried under circumstances. And what love is saying is to hang in there, persist during circumstances when you are underneath them. So the first one is to forbear when, that is when you're provoked. The second one is to forbear who, that is people. The third one is to forbear where, that is when we find you underneath something. The final one is the hope all things. Love hopes all things. Now what that means is a confidence in the future. It's the hallmark of Christianity. It's the bearing of the downside would be, well, you give up spiritually, you give up mentally, you acquiesce to stinking thinking, as we've called it in the past, with doubt. And it's like we forget who we are And probably in the same context, we forget who God is. So our mind, soul, and spirit can be kind of discouraged, or we enter into spiritual doubt, or we kind of run out of gas in our hearts. So the fourth forbearance is forbear why. Why? Because we're hoping in a future. Okay, so there's so many practical things here. It is it's to hold back when we're provoked, when patience is required, or restrain an impulse when we are disappointed by other human beings. So that's forbear who? Well, that's people. The third thing is to persist when we are located underneath difficult circumstances. That's the endurance of all things. That answers the question of bear where, when you're underneath. And then the fourth one is to stand on the confidence and the assurity in God, in Christ, in the truths, his indwelling spirit, and hope in all the things he's done for us in conquering sin and death. But when there's a doubt or a chink in the armor of God that we're supposed to be wearing, that is when we're supposed to be kind of hanging in there. Bearing why? Because we have a confidence in the future, and that's like the essentials of Christianity. So, forbear when? When you are provoked, when your patience is tested. Forbear who? Well, forbear the people that we're surrounded with. That's what bearing all things means. More specifically, more accurately, bearing all people. And forbear where? When we find you underneath, when we find you just enduring, when there does not seem to be an end in sight for circumstances. And forbear why? Because we have a confident future. That's what it means to be hoping in all things. So this is the hard internal work of love. Like, for example, love is patient. That's kind of an external thing. All these four things that we're talking about today is kind of like nobody would know that you're doing this unless you're explaining them. So what's going on inside? Bear with being provoked, bear with people, bear with circumstances, bear with the spiritual battle that we all fight inside. And then the other charge would be to get with people that are doing this. That I think this would be such an encouragement to find out how your brothers and sisters in Christ, or your spouse, or the people around you, or your friends are bearing when, bearing who, bearing where, and bearing why. Thank you for listening to the Four Bears of Love.